Powerhouses Siemens and AES join forces. The biggest advanced battery energy storage fleet in the world. Taking the stage next is the COO of Fluence Energy to talk about the power energy storage innovation in their ambitious first project. Please welcome in conversation with TechCrunch's Jonathan Schieber, John Zahurancik.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you all for showing up or sticking around. One bit of housekeeping notes just for y'all's edification. Anything dumb I say is my own. Anything smart I say belongs to TechCrunch. Otherwise, we're all good to go. Hopefully this should be an electrifying conversation, really high energy. Hopefully folks will get a charge out of it. I'm going to see how many puns I can throw in during the course of our questioning.
Keep going.
Look, I want to start off with just sort of a very simple question, which is, there's been a lot of talk around energy storage, large-scale energy storage for a long time, about decades, but no one seemed to be able, until sort of Elon did it at Tesla, no one seemed to be able to get to that 100-megawatt stage. Why now? What's happening now that's revolutionizing or charging up this segment of the storage industry?
Sure, it's a good question. I mean, people have talked about using batteries in combination with the power system for a long time, as you mentioned. I mean, for a long while, the batteries just simply weren't good enough. But what we found with the consumer electronics revolution and now what we're seeing in transportation is that the cells have become good enough. And we started working on systems like the one you're seeing on the picture there more than a decade ago. So large-scale battery systems have been in use commercially for about 10 years. We are hitting a period where more and more countries, more and more places are doing that right now. So we had a 100-megawatt system that was contracted to Southern California Edison about 3 years ago. Ground is broken on that, and that's in construction. We have a couple others around the world, like this one. It's currently the largest in the Americas. You saw a second ago. That's already built in an operation in San Diego.
How should people think about Fluence? Is it a technology developer? Is it an integrator? How should people think
Sure,
about
yeah, a bit of both. A technology developer from the sense of how do we integrate the pieces that exist in terms of the battery cells and power conversion. Those are built by very large companies. We partner with people like LG Chem, Samsung, Panasonic, and so on. We put those together in an architecture, and then we build a set of controls that allow them to work like a power plant or like a transmission system investment would work.
I want to get back to the why now question, though. So when you were doing these projects before, was that under the auspices of AES? Was that under the auspices of Siemens? How did the two decide to come together to form Fluence?
Yeah. Well, I came from the AES side, and so I had a hand in founding the AES business in batteries. And we were really just looking for a better way to do some of the things that we had historically done with big generators. And so AES ran power generation in more than 20 countries around the world. We found that there were a lot of jobs where we were running power generators in a way that was really not the most effective way to use that generator. So you have a less efficient production, more emissions, greater consumption of fuel, and you wear the equipment out. And we saw batteries emerging and said, this seems to be something that could do this same job, do it cleaner, do it cheaper, do it better, and is very much in line with stewardship and environmental goals that we're seeing around the world. So we put the first battery in the world, first advanced lithium-ion battery in the world online in 2008 in Indianapolis, and then we've grown larger and larger systems since then.
And the Siemens component of it, are they coming in really as a financial partner for this, a technology partner, or both?
Both. So a few years after AES got into this, Siemens got into it also, and they began doing projects like this one here in Ventatina Island in Italy, where they used batteries in combination on a microgrid. And so maybe 5 years ago, they got involved with it as a technology systems provider as well. We bumped into each other a year and a half or so ago and found we had a very similar vision for the fact that we didn't see the need to continue to build new power plants in a lot of places in the world. In some places you do, where they need electricity production, but in many places in the world we build power plants for insurance and reliability and to make sure we meet just that last increment of peak. Those are pretty inefficient uses for a power plant. If you only run it 3 or 4 or 8 or 20 hours of the year, a battery can be doing that same job, manage all of that peak, but we can use it every day of the year for other grid balancing jobs. So it's a much more effective investment, and it allows us to put everything else at a much, much stabler, much more steady point. It's kind of like hybridizing your car. You get a lot of efficiency out of it. Hybridizing the power system is really what we're about.
Well, so how does this fit into the broad, we've heard a lot about renewables earlier today, we've heard a lot about the role that sustainable energy production will play in all of this. How do batteries fit into that equation? Walk us through the energy grid of the future as y'all see it and the role that y'all will play within it.
Yeah, well, I would say there's two things. One, it fits today because we have lots of places where we can add a small amount of storage and have a tremendous impact. We can either make things less expensive because we're not holding other generation in standby, we're not using other types of solutions, building out excessive amounts of transmission just in case of an event that rarely occurs. So we build a lot of power generation, we build a lot of transmission for the event that occurs maybe once a year or twice a year. And we have to have that because the power grid has to stay on. It's one of the fundamental infrastructures of almost any economy anywhere. And so we, in some senses, overbuild the grid in order to make sure that we get the reliability that we really need. Storage, like it is in anything, if you have storage in a data system, if you have storage in a water reservoir, if you have storage in traffic lights, however you use storage, it adds efficiency. And so by taking these large batteries, and some of these are an acre's worth of batteries. It's essentially like a data center without the computers. That can substitute for needing to build another transmission line, or can defer one until we really need it. It can substitute for building a new power plant. And basically, it allows us to take advantage of making all of the infrastructure we've already invested in use just a little bit more efficiently. So that's today's solution. Tomorrow, when we introduce more and more renewables, we have less of those large power generators on, and we have a problem of balancing and making sure that we have constant power. And so we have a job to do with storage today, and it's doing it in many places around the world, and we have a bigger job to do tomorrow to make sure we get the most out of renewable power generation.
What does that mean for customers? What does that mean for my energy bill in the short term and the long term with these projects? Does this jump up the cost or pop the cost up for my bills?
No, in most cases, these are being done as cost-effective alternatives to what somebody else would otherwise buy. So if the utility is looking at meeting a local capacity need where they're saying, I don't have enough power generation, like I mentioned one of the projects in Los Angeles, they didn't have enough power generation in the Los Angeles basin for when some of the older plants were retiring. They contracted storage instead of contracting a new power plant. So in many cases, it's actually substituting for other investments. In some cases, it's going in right alongside a solar or a wind facility, and it's immediately complementing that from the beginning.
Why do you hate America and the coal industry so much? Why are you destroying jobs for our hardworking men and women?
I don't. I actually came from AES. The company runs all kinds of different fuels. I think, in this case, we're just finding new technologies have emerged that can do some of the old jobs better. And so you have to move forward with what's better. And batteries suit, it won't take everything. Batteries don't create electricity fundamentally, right? So something has to create the electricity, whether that's going to be coal or gas or increasingly it's going to be renewables. That's really the way we're seeing it play out. Something then has to help make sure that that's balanced and firm at all times. In some places in the world, they have a lot of hydropower, and so that does that. It does that balancing job. In some places, it's natural gas today. But for a big part of that power job, batteries are cost-effective and very well suited. We can put them in places we couldn't put a power plant. We can put them in places that we can't put a hydroelectric dam. We've done some of these in dense urban areas where it just looks like a small warehouse, or it looks like a series of these containers. So it just has a profile that allows us to work in a much better way.
And how do you see these things getting funded in the future? There's been a lot of talk as well in the industry about microgrids and sort of exploring different options to sort of the big utilities and their role in the whole ecosystem. How do you see microgrids sort of fitting into what y'all are doing? Are you working with any of these microgrid developers yourselves right now?
We are, yeah. And part of Fluence, the company coming together, is Siemens, and Siemens has done a number of microgrids in different places in the world. That's really where that customer, that whether it's a business or whether it's a community, is seeing a need for greater reliability, or they're seeing a need to combine this with something else they have to complement it. And so we do see a lot of that activity. And even beyond microgrids, I think a lot of just businesses have decided to be more involved in their energy future. And they're beginning to look at purchasing their own renewables. They've been doing that in increasing quantities over the last few years. As they've gotten into that, they've said, okay, well, maybe we should be looking at batteries for managing our overall demand profile and usage profile. So we see a lot of growth in those areas. So it's really all of the above. We see utilities, we see power systems generally, commercial customers, industrial, whether it's a microgrid or it's not a microgrid.
What do the forward-looking contracts look like? So y'all have 2 projects now, 2 big projects for the 100 megawatt battery storage. What else do y'all have going on?
We have lots of smaller ones too. So the big ones are the big ones. And I think those are kind of breaking new ground in scale, and they draw on the fact that we've been doing this for over 10 years. But we have a lot of ones that are 1 and 2 and 5 megawatts systems that go into smaller areas. They might go into a commercial customer like we were just talking about, where they have a need to smooth out their power consumption. We have other ones where we did some things in Arizona alongside a small distribution system where it's just a couple megawatts, but it's avoiding them having to upgrade a transmission line over 20 miles.
How much does these systems cost?
It varies a bit depending on what you want to do with it, but anywhere from maybe $500,000 a megawatt up to $1.5 million a megawatt.
And are y'all developing these projects yourselves, or do you work with project developers, other financiers? How does that work?
Well, coming out of AES, now AES develops projects of their own, and other developers develop projects of their own, and we're the technology system provider. And so we work with them, we work with the financing parties to make sure they have confidence in the technology, how it's going to work, how it will work over life. One of the big questions with batteries is always how do they wear out? What do they degrade? And we help manage all of that. We have a history of managing that for the customer.
Y'all only launched this year,
That's right.
with the combination from Siemens and AES.
That's right.
How much money do y'all have to play around with?
Well, we have 2 Fortune 500 parents who fully funded a business plan. Prior to that launch, we had already mobilized about $450 million into projects, and this was the next investment to go to the next stage. So it's a little bit different in that we're not investing in hard assets, but we have a firm and full backing. We haven't announced a number, but 2 big companies.
I wouldn't
mind. I don't think so. But
is it bigger than a bread box?
Bigger than a bread box.
Bigger than a battery storage system?
Bigger than a battery storage system.
Can you Scrooge McDuck in it? Can you swim around? No, I'm sorry. I'll move on.
Enough to keep going as the largest provider of storage systems in the world.
You talk about the technology, and y'all are using lithium-ion batteries now, right? When you think about your role in the ecosystem as new technologies develop, are there any things that y'all are excited about right now? What do you see as the next wave of technologies that will continue to drive down the cost?
That's a good question. One of the things one of the things that's pretty exciting is we've seen just very rapid advances even in these core technologies. The lithium-ion systems, even though they've been around for a while, there's every year lots of advances, incremental advances in life, in production, the way that they're tuning them to be used in these cases, density. The systems that we're doing now are on the order of 20 times more dense than the systems we were doing 10 years ago, and that translates into cost reduction. It translates into more that can be put into a compact space where you might not otherwise have been able to put something on the power grid because the area was too small. You get into places like New York City or tight areas in any urban area, that's pretty exciting. So I think that's a big piece of what we're seeing. Advances in cooling, which somewhat mundane, but it's something that's pretty significant to the battery systems. I think is good. We see a whole host of investments in battery technologies of different types. And one of the things that we do is we often work with those companies as an incubator, where we have practical places that you could put a new technology, put it into service in the field, and get some experience with it. That's one of the biggest challenges these new technologies have. Is people want to see a track record. They want to see it move beyond a lab scale into some practical use in the field and see how it really works in the field. We have worked with some providers to be able to give them a place to do that, either alongside a larger project that we're doing or in some other setting like that, that allows us then to be a partner to some of those emerging technologies.
Do you have long-term supply contracts locked in with different battery vendors right now?
We do, yeah, and we have a partnership with battery suppliers and as well as with
who's your partner on the battery side?
We've talked very publicly about LG Chem being one. We've done a lot with Samsung. There's a few others as well. And then on power conversion, we've done quite a lot with Parker Hannifin.
Okay.
So those have been long-term, strong partners.
Any startups that you're working with right now? Any new companies?
There are a couple that we're working with in kind of the lab, not really lab. These are kind of full market projects, but a couple things in one flow battery company and one in another alternative.
What is the flow battery company?
Vionics.
Vionics.
Yes.
And the other company is
EOS.
Okay. And is that a lithium ion or what?
No, it's another alternate chemistry.
Okay. What is their chemistry?
It's a I don't remember off the top of my head now. Yeah, it's a derivative of a lead acid battery.
Have you talked to the God battery guys? I think it's Ionic batteries. The guys that are backed by I forget their name, but it's also a new chemistry. Have you? You don't know what I'm saying. You're giving me that blank look.
I'm sure someone in our group has talked because we track about 120 different new technology companies, and they're at various stages from early research all the way up to nearly in the field type of thing. And this is coming all the time. I think one of the challenges and maybe one of the biggest dynamics I've seen change in the last 10 years, though, is the aggressiveness of the lithium-ion companies in producing very large scale, moving to larger format batteries to get materials costs down, creating an increasing number of high-volume manufacturing facilities around the world. So the price point at which you're competing as a new technology continues to decline each year. And so, just a few years ago, people thought getting under $300 a kilowatt hour was a breakthrough. But today you've got lithium-ion well below that and continuing to decline.
I sort of joked about how much you hate America earlier, and as you look at international, the global development of this stuff, which markets seem attractive to you? Has the U.S. market slowed down at all, given the sort of policy world that we're living in now?
It hasn't really, actually. I think that's because most of energy procurement is actually not federal in any way. It's really a local thing. And so the procurements of new energy is really at the local public utilities commissions, the local utilities, the local developers in a lot of cases. And there's a very strong growth curve now. The U.S. is retiring a lot of power generation, just that it's aging out. And when you retire all of that, something has to take its place.
Right.
What we've seen is a shift to saying, energy storage is not a technology of the future, it's actually a technology of today. And when you're thinking about making this next social investment, a 20 or 30-year investment, energy storage is increasingly in that conversation in many, many states. So there's more than 35 states today that have energy storage facilities installed. And then around the world, you see places like the UK, Australia, Germany, Japan, very active markets, Korea.
What is the geography where you're seeing the most demand?
The U.S. is still the leading market in the world, and then beyond that, probably Australia and, in some cases like Germany and the UK.
Okay.
I would say.
Are y'all looking at China at all as a market for y'all, or not really?
We're not very active in China, and right now, and there's a lot that goes on in China. There's a whole Chinese ecosystem of battery suppliers and battery vendors. We work with some of the battery vendors, but in terms of being active in that market, we're not at the moment.
And when you think about the massive sort of renewable projects that are coming online, I think you've got the Saudis spending $500 million or some insane number like that on renewables right now. Do you just look at that and go, oh my God, the world is great? Or like, how do you see playing in the, you're like, yeah, it's wonderful.
I mean, it's a conversion, it's a whole transition of the power generation system, right? This comes along, once in a century maybe, right? Where we see this massive transformation from basically thermal powered fuels to renewable fuels. So it's a huge transformation. And in the midst of that, we have the opportunity to introduce new technologies that will complement that, like energy storage. So it's not just the fact that it's a large solar facility, but if you look globally, spending on renewables has topped the spending on conventional power, the last several years. That's a transition that's occurring, and to do that, then we need a modern grid that complements that. It's not just about creating electricity, it's about getting it to people in the most cost-effective, reliable manner, and storage fits squarely in that. It adds reliability, it takes out some of the investments we would otherwise need to make in transmission or other power distribution, to get that to them cost effectively.
Is there a lot of appetite for new technologies? Are people willing to spend, or is the sort of lithium-ion battery now proven to the point where you don't see that kind of appetite for new investment?
I think it's maybe a bit of both. I think there will always be the appetite to try some things at small scale, but when people start to move to projects that are truly substituting for a power generator, then you want to make sure it's fairly proven. And so they want a track record behind that. They want to work with somebody that's done some of these projects before. Just practical matter, you usually get into some kind of financing. The financial community wants to know that this is something that has a track record and that they understand is going to work for a good long time. So these are large projects. Some of these projects are on the order of $100 million. And they want to know that they're going to have the opportunity to earn their money. They'll be around. They'll work well, and not only they work well on day one, but they'll be able to adapt to the environment as it changes. So we've seen a lot in 10 or 11 years. We've done this in 17 countries now and lots of different places. So we've seen a lot of what batteries have to do in order to work in the power system in a practical way, and it's different in different places. It's not all the same thing everywhere.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we are out of time. I could talk about this stuff all day, and I'm sure you could too. John, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening.